Douglas Murray, let's get into the BBC, the Trump scandal. It's not isolated, it's not a simple misjudgment, but there are plenty in the UK, including journalist and editor Kevin Maguire, who claim otherwise.
Now, I am no defender of Trump, but I'm no defender of lousy, bent journalism either. And I'm sorry, that Panorama documentary was lousy, bent, dishonest journalism. And we should all be ashamed of it.
Trump was a defender of the Proud Boys and white supremacists.
You're ignoring the facts, Kevin.
You were taking, right, you were taking a 12 to 15 second clip in a full programme, programme that was broadcast a year ago, and I'm not aware of any big public complaints about it.
Douglas, what's your response to that?
Well, Kevin Maguire in the UK is quite well known as a sort of left-wing blowhard, and what he said there just adds insult to injury. There really is no defending what the BBC has been caught doing. What Maguire does there is add to that offence by claiming that by throwing out other completely untrue smears against President Trump, like him supporting white supremacists. I mean, that's just that's the very fine people hoax. But no, I mean, he and other activists like him will keep spreading their untruths. But the fact is that the BBC has been caught out in a set of really, really disgraceful lies. The most prominent one is this to do with editing President Trump's speech on January the 6th to suggest that he said that he would that the protesters gathered together should engage in violence by fighting. And of course, for all the terrible things that did go on that day, that was not what the president said in his remarks. And Panorama simply spliced two quotes together that gave a very clear impression that President Trump was indeed urging supporters to go and fight. But that's not the only thing. This is such a huge download of errors by the BBC that there are other things that have got lost in it. One of them is the BBC's proven serial lies about Israel during the Israel-Hamas war. The unbelievable way in which BBC Arabic, which frankly should just be canned, it should be shuttered. The BBC has no control over it. Just welcomes all these terrorist supporters all the time and gives their anti-Israel views. And then, of course, there's the stuff on the trans issue as well. This is a really disgraceful moment for the BBC, and it's even more disgraceful that anyone would try to hide it.
Well, yeah, you're 100% right there. The BBC's institutional bias goes well beyond Donald Trump, goes beyond Nigel Farage and their coverage of the Middle East. Even a documentary about Bill Cosby a couple of years ago displays just how lost the BBC is. Watch some of the nonsense they aired.
If we actually grappled with the fact that sex negativity is what causes this type of behavior, then we could create a world where in a idyllically sex-positive world, someone is able to pay conscious women to come and be drugged so that I can get my kink out, my fetish on having sex with unconscious people. There's a consensual way to do that.
Well, there you go, a therapist promoting an idyllically sex-positive world where men can just fulfill their fetishes by having sex with unconscious people. I mean, what am I even hearing, Douglas?
Not just what are you hearing, what are you seeing? I don't want to women talk about sex positivity in any way. No, I mean, and look, this is the BBC is just so fantastically lost. By the way, there's a very clear reason for it. I'm not an enemy of the BBC. I'm a critic of it. I would like to see the BBC doing what it has boasted that it's doing, which it hasn't done for years, but which it has done at times in the past, which is to provide genuinely impartial journalism and a place where people can agree that there is a sort of non-biased, fact-based channel with all of its subsidiary channels, which you can go to get a trusted news source. And, you know, it's just so characteristic of the BBC and certain other media in this age. They set up all these things like BBC Verify to try to prove fake news in other media and on social media and so on. But they're pumping out fake news themselves, as the events of the last few days have shown. I mean, it's just completely unacceptable that an allegedly non-biased platform would be shown to have extreme bias in so many cases. And the point about that needs to come out is, as Charles Moore pointed out the other day, that the bias in the BBC always goes in one direction. You know, it's never like accidentally biased in favor of Nigel Farage. It's never accidentally biased against illegal migrants. It's never accidentally biased in favor of biological reality. No. It's always the same metropolitan left-wing tropes, the anti-Israelism, the anti-Trumpism, and so on. And it's because these journalists at the BBC, which used to be, I stress again, it used to be a real bastion where there were serious reporters, fact checkers, editors, presenters, and much more. It's a place which represents one particular viewpoint, and they have the right to do that if they want to become a privately owned company, and not take a tax from every household in the UK that owns a television, in order to push this as being mainstream. It's so well documented now, this one-directional bias. And I hope that what we've seen with the resignation of the Director General and the head of news isn't thought to be just the solution to the problem. It isn't. The problem is institutional in the BBC. Until it is a safe space for conservative-minded journalists and others to discuss openly in editorial meetings and elsewhere the sorts of things that they should be covering, then it has no right to claim impartiality.
Well, it has a huge number of staff, huge number of journalists, producers. How many of them are conservative? How many of the ones who have programs, who are hosts, who are anchors on radio, on television, are conservatives? It's very easy just to determine the bias there. And as you said, they're taxpayer funded, so they have a charter, they're obliged to be balanced. And when it comes to biological reality, as you mentioned, the trans issue, Douglas, they're not much better there either, are they?
No, I mean, it's on all of these issues. You know, recently one of the newscasters got into some trouble because she had to read out a line about, what was it, birthing people, and something like that, and she sort of said women, you know, and slightly rolled her eyes and got into trouble for that. You know, it all goes back to that thing you just mentioned, Rita. How many non-left-wing liberals are in the BBC? I don't actually know now if there are any. Some 20 years ago, I knew some. I used to get together with some of them socially out of hours. I used to joke to them that the small group of conservatives in the BBC, and we used to meet in a pub or a bar and talk about things. I used to joke that they behaved like 1950s homosexuals. You know, they had to have a sort of secret code and, you know, hope that no one at work had guessed their dirty little secret and so on. But that's just appalling. You know, at least 50% of the country have no representation in the editorial process of presenting and much more. And again, you can tell the one-directional bias from the fact that when BBC presenters and others leave, like there's a group of them who used to be at Newsnight, they left and set up their own sort of podcast. What is the thing they do once the guardrails of the pretense of impartiality are off? They're all campaigning anti-Trump, anti-conservative, anti-Tory, left-wing activists. It's always like that. When they leave the BBC, the thin veneer that they had whilst they were at it completely disappears. And I'm afraid that's still going on. You have presenters like Nick Robinson, a well-known leftist, and doesn't really manage to hide it on air, extremely disagreeable to any Conservative he's interviewing. People like Nick Robinson are trying to cover this up even now this week by pretending there's sort of no problem here, really. So I don't see any sign the BBC is actually going to reform.
You know what? One of the things I love about social media, particularly X or Twitter as it used to be called, is the way it has removed that veneer, because you have these individuals on social media putting out their opinions, and then you can see why they report the way they do. And it's one thing to be in the opinion game like you and I are and state our opinions, but when you're supposed to be a news reporter and completely impartial, it's a different thing. And I just want to play you a little clip about how the BBC covers trans issues.
Now, transgender woman's milk is just as good for babies as breast milk. That's according to a letter from the medical director at University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. The claim was made as part of a response against campaign groups. The trust referred to studies and the World Health Organization guidance, including one case which found what it called no observable effects in babies fed by induced lactation.
Well, there you go, Douglas. I don't know, maybe you can take a cocktail of drugs and start lactating and feeding a child, and it'll just be just as good as mother's milk. I mean, really, the institutional bias is not just how they present a story and how they frame it, but also it's often with the guest selection and the story selection itself.
Yes, I mean, in that case, I'm not going to take you up on your offer of that cocktail, if you don't mind, Rita. I prefer a straight-up martini myself. But no, that's an absolute classic one, isn't it? How could whatever the secretion is that comes out of somebody who's trying to change the pretense of biological sex, how could whatever cocktail it is that comes out that will be pumped full of the hormones that the person in question is taking, how could that possibly be as good as mother's milk? This is the sort of thing which the BBC will push as part of the trans extremist agenda. And they don't have to. You know, they could have taken a completely reasonable view all the whole way along, like some of us did, which is things like, you know, let's look into this a bit more, because it seems to be, you know, that there's an awful lot to look into here, and let's not make up facts. But they want to, because they want to push a particular agenda. And as I say, it's all in one direction repeatedly. It's never the gender woo-woo critical thing it falls into the direction of. You know, it's all this kind of, you know, and I'm amazed that she didn't end up saying or claiming that actually trans lady estrogen testosterone milk is actually best, and we should all gulp it down all day long, otherwise we're bigots. I mean, it's so preposterous, and you can see through it. And this should have had a big halt to it a long time ago. And by the way, just one other thing on that, Rita, you mentioned the guests. Absolutely the case. As anyone can see, the last time I was on the BBC, I was invited on Newsnight, and the presenter did what he always does with anyone who's not a card-carrying socialist, and he basically treats any one of our views as a convict awaiting sentence. They treat you like you're a monster criminal in the dock, and they've already decided you're guilty. And then meantime, they'll get some radical left-wing lawyer, you know, who represents, you know, the most disgraceful and disgusting people in society, and they'll present them as, you know, like human rights champion and all that sort of thing. It's really transparent, and it's really despicable for a broadcaster that pretends to have impartiality.
Now, before you go, Remembrance Day was yesterday, and this clip of a 100-year-old World War II veteran, Alec Penstone, on Good Morning Britain went viral in recent days. Have a quick look.
What does Remembrance Sunday mean for you? What is your message?
My message is, I can see in my mind's eye those rows and rows of white stones of all the hundreds of my friends and everybody else that gave their lives for what? The country of today. No, I'm sorry. The sacrifice wasn't worth the result that it is now.
That's just so terribly sad, Douglas, that someone who sacrificed so much for Britain is so dismayed by what it has become.
It was heartbreaking, Rita, seeing that. I don't know exactly, of course, what he was referring to, but I think we can all make some guesses. It's heartbreaking that he would.
He was talking also about a little bit about the lack of freedom in Britain. He mentioned freedom, and I thought that was interesting that he's noting what is happening in modern Britain.
Well, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, the British people now live in a country, as you and I have discussed before, where the police will not bother to come and investigate a home robbery. But they turn up at thousands of households every year, arresting people, putting people in handcuffs, charging people for things they've said on Twitter that go against the perceived narrative, the acceptable narrative, the BBC narrative, and much more. And you know, I don't think that does mean that the sacrifices of our forebears were in vain. But my goodness, it's sad to see that interview. And my goodness, it's sad to see what Britain has become in recent years. And just look at the fall off. Just look at the fall off in political leadership from the people who led Great Britain in the 1950s. From all parties, by the way. Consider an Attlee or a Churchill against what we have today. And yes, it's a very sad fall off. I'm deeply saddened when I saw that interview. But I hope that people watching it who have the same response we have are reminded by it that actually we have a great inheritance we need to sustain and not to just continue wrecking.
Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.